Last night I was up until 2 a.m. finishing a 3-hour game of Dune Imperium, specifically Dune Imperium Uprising, with the brand new Bloodlines expansion included. Over the course of the last year, Dune Imperium has become one of my favorite games of all time, arguably in a new top 10 list that will probably be coming out later this year, and probably one of my most played games as well, not only for introducing brand new players into the deck building genre, which is a genre of gaming that I love, but also a game that can satisfy and draw the attention of experienced gamers. Last night it was myself, my wife, and one of the most advanced gamers in our entire gaming group, and all of us were playing strategically, carefully, and trying to push for victory. It was so satisfying and just reminded me of how good and how remarkably intricate and yet accessible Dune Imperium is. However, there is one major problem. And in this video, I'm hoping to solve that problem for a few of you. Where do you start? Dune Imperium is one of those games that, like a few other publishers, but not so many, have put out an iteration, a standalone, not an expansion, not a module, not another version of the game. You know, we have things like Wingspan going to Wormspan, going to Fish Spawn, going to, I don't know, rock collecting sometime in the future. That's not what Dune Imperium does. Instead, they put out a game that's about 90 or 80% identical, with core strategic changes that vastly impact the experience of the players at the table. And the community has been split on it to a large degree, depending on if you like introducing, expansions into your game group, if you happen to be a slow, plodding, careful, strategic player, or a swingy, let's, cut the rope and do battle and win through sheer blood, guts, and glory. This video has one major statement. Don't buy both. If you're looking to start in Dune Imperium, if you're looking to get into this beautiful game, which I very much think you should, link down below to an Amazon page that'll, give me an affiliate commission, because I could use it. I still have to buy a copy of Bloodlines for myself. I borrowed this from a guy in my gaming group. Either way, I think you should buy Dune Imperium, but I don't think you should buy both. I'm going to break down 5 core areas that differentiate the two game systems and talk about what might make one of them right for you and one of them wrong for you. And at the very end of this, I'll give you my personal opinion as to which one I like the most and in what context I happen to like it the most. I think once you own and enjoy and have experienced Dune Imperium, you will end up getting both copies of this game. I think that's one of the strategic and intelligent things that, Dire Wolf did. They put out a game that encourages you to want to own it all. But if you're just starting, you should buy one core and then start picking up the expansions, the deluxifications, the upgrades that exist out there on the market before buying an entire another version of the core game. Those 5 areas. We're going to talk about combat and how swingy each game system is. Is it more Euro-esque, highly strategic, careful placement, or you could show up with 4 or 5 victory points right at the tail end of the game and steal victory from other players? I want to talk about the spy mechanic, which I won't teach you how to use, but I'll give you a threshold for how that impacts the strategy and the depth of the game when tying it to other systems like expansions. I want to look at the leaders. And again, not walk you through each individual one, but how good are the leaders? And how often are you excited to play with whatever systems or asymmetry they provide? We're going to look at the complexity, the locations on the board, how they adapted those to make them either more complex and worth going to, or too complex and hard to integrate. And then we're going to talk about the expansion integration. There's 3 core expansions at the moment, and where I think those expansions fit best in this core system, because once you love Dune Imperium, you will naturally be inclined to want to include the expansions. In fact, when I first played the base game of Dune Imperium, It was my least favorite out of this genre. The three games, Lost Ruins of Arnak, Endless Winter, and Dune Imperium, were all worker placement deck building games, and it was the one I liked the least. However, as I started exploring expansions and adding them to the game mix, it has risen to the top of the pile by far measure. I still own a copy of Endless Winter. I don't even have a copy of Lost Ruins of Arnak anymore. It's good, but I felt like I kind of got to the end of the experience, whereas Dune Imperium, I'm still constantly and currently excited to get to the table, even if it means I'm playing till 2 a.m. and the game's lasting way longer than it reasonably should. Okay, let's break this down. Let's analyze the properties here and let me know how each one fits for you, if it makes it more right for you or less right for you, and where you're going to start. Again, Amazon link. I won't mention it after this. I probably will, but it's so much. It helps so much. And I want my own copy of Bloodlines. All right, combat and swing. So the core feature between these two games, in my opinion, happens to be the degree of swing or swinginess in the victory. Dune Imperium Uprising introduces these beautiful little sandworms, and the sandworms operate as another unit, another person that you can add into your battle. It takes some strategy to get to a point where you can recruit them, but once you do, they double your victory. And the combat in this game skews towards end game combat, the last few rounds of combat, providing lots and lots of available victory points as long as you meet the required conditions. And if you introduce a sandworm into that mix and you have the requirements like, enough Solari or enough spice to add into the equation, you could find yourself scoring 3 or 4 victory points in one single swoop. That makes Dune Imperium Uprising both highly combat focused, because it drives victory, it drives endgame towards the combat system, and way more swingy. Both with hidden objectives, with victory points that are behind closed doors, to the public marketplace of victory points that are here on the table, and the amount that you can score at the very end of the game. It drives game and, I would argue, a little bit quicker. But when I played Dune, base game Dune, I almost never saw scores hit above the 11 or 12 mark. A 10 was a solid way to win. An 11, you probably had it locked and loaded. I never saw all players scale or soar above the 10, which is the threshold for finishing the game and calculating your end game score, looking for any of those hidden victory points that I mentioned. Well, in Dune Imperium Uprising, I think almost everyone finishes above that threshold. Last night, I won with 15 points, which is more than I think I've ever seen scored in base game Dune. I had 4 hidden victory points at the end of the game. The combat that I won gave me an additional 2, making it an end game swing of 6 total points. That's significant, that's major, and that's something to focus on and overcome. If you like more careful, more strategic worker placement style games, a little bit closer to the Euro gaming genre, if you want to be able to really count on the victory points that are public knowledge and your strategy being the thing that overcomes and closes that gap for victory, then base game Dune Imperium is going to be the game that's right for you. However, if you like a more swingy, more chaotic, more climactic finish to the game, which I know those are big, bold words, but it doesn't always make it better, Dune Imperium will provide that. It's more focused on combat. Even without the expansions included, it's more focused on swing, and you can steal victory from someone who feels very confident closing the game by meeting that 10-point threshold. I fall in between on these two categories. And I'll tell you, when I first moved from Dune to Dune Imperium Uprising, I didn't like how swingy it was. I didn't know how to balance it, and I didn't expect it to happen, and so I felt completely taken aback at just how many victory points were available on the table. That's changed a little bit as I've played, dozens of games, but it still does have that little bit too much. Let's keep that in mind. Moving on to the next one, let's talk about the Spy, which is a new introduction into Dune Imperium Uprising. and how the strategy evolves because of them. Spies are units that you can place down at different locations on the game. This is a worker placement game, so you have locations that close themselves off if other people have gone to them. Well, spies allow you to break the rules of the game in two ways in the core system. You might have cards that modify this as you continue deck building. In the core game, you don't have spies at all. When a location's covered up, for the most part, that location cannot be returned to. However, in Uprising, if you have a spy, you could either recall that spy when you place a worker at that designated location or attached location to get a draw card effect, which can be very powerful and sometimes extremely helpful and impactful. Or you can use that spy, recall that spy, in order to place a worker at a location that another player has already gone to, making it so it's a little bit multi-use. Strategically, this opens the door to long-term, varying strategies of play. It allows locations to not be blocked off by another player happening to go first in turn order or having the resources one cycle before you, which can be very rewarding. It can be worthwhile to, sit down and want to go to a place and be able to go to a place because you've preemptively, fixed a spy in front of it. However, this does require a serious amount of board awareness, of long-term strategy, and if you find yourself blocked off in the spy game, other players might have a distinct advantage over you because they've purposefully utilized their spies to allow them to go to a location to recruit more troops or gain those resources they need towards the end stage of the game when combat is so essential. And you just kind of threw your spies down haphazardly and have recalled them for a free card or two here or there. Spies are central. Spies open up the strategy. Spies give you a lot of agency over the late portion of the game. However, it doesn't mean they make the game better. Spies solve some problems while introducing others, and the primary problem they introduce is a need to know where you're headed, a need to know where you're playing, a need to know how your strategy might progress. So, Uprising probably fits players who are going to play a little bit more often with a little bit more of a regular gaming group. It takes more to learn, takes more to think through, and the consequence of not having as much experience is felt much more deeply in Dune Uprising. I would have to say that Imperium takes, or Dune base game, Dune Imperium, takes the cake here. If I want to introduce this game to a new gaming group, or if I'm buying this as not a fanatic fan who has a dedicated board gaming group that understands and loves deep strategy, but I'm just a hobbyist or a family gamer or someone getting into this space, because Dune Imperium is probably closer to an entry-level board game for a lot of people in the community. It's like Catan, Dune Imperium. I think it's probably a better place to start. So, let me know, which one of those two categories sound more like your gaming group? The next point that's worth touching on is something I'll try not to dwell on too much, but it's the leaders, the asymmetry, the strategy for how you're approaching every session of Dune. In Dune Imperium, you had a fairly reasonable range of low-level to high-level complexity leaders, letting the board balance itself. I always let new players get a pick. They can read through the cards and decide which leader they want to experience the game with, what mechanic system feels interesting and fun to them. In Dune Imperium Uprising, all of those leaders get simplified to a large degree, I would argue. And purposefully so. I believe Direwolf has even acknowledged that they scaled back the complexity of the leaders to provide space for the board and the game strategy to get a little bit more deep. I understand that. However, the leaders provide a unique way to experience the game every time, and if I'm only utilizing a, signet ring power or a leader-specific power once or twice during the course of the game, it doesn't shape and direct the experience as much as I would prefer it to. I will admit that I think the leaders that come from some of the other modules and expansions are a bit more compelling, with Bloodlines being probably the most compelling set of leaders I have seen to date. However, between these two core games, if you're not going to buy both of them, I would encourage you to think through what you and your gaming group value the most. Do you value asymmetry? Do you value personal story and strategy, the unique way of directing the game in front of you? Do you want a game system that allows you to balance experienced players with more complex powers and abilities with less experienced players that have simpler rules to follow but can keep in the game a little bit easier because of that? Dune Imperium base game will fit that niche a little bit more accurately. Dune Imperium Uprising simplifies the leaders across the board while making the table as a whole more complex, meaning the skill level of all players goes up and the interest of the story or the character or the strategy you're approaching the game with might actually be reduced to some degree. When I played with the leaders from Bloodlines, I found my entire strategy to be dictated by the leader that I was playing. Now, it was a level 3 in complexity, specifically the steersman Yarkanon. I didn't say that right. You'll correct me down below, and I won't be able to hear what you said because you'll spell it out in hieroglyphics with a lot of dashes and indications, and my dyslexia will prevent me from reading it accurately. However, I like having asymmetry. I like having characters that I feel like I'm fully embodying, that are impacting the game state. This game doesn't change. This board doesn't change. I don't mind if it's more or less complex, but the people I have in front of me, if they impact the entire course of play, that changes from game session to game session. And I find that to be very rewarding. The next one, let's talk about complexity, specifically with locations. Some of the locations in Dune Imperium Uprising are just better. They're more interesting, they're more complex, they provide you more opportunities to get a wide array of resources and randomize or differentiate the game as you play from scenario to scenario. Whereas Dune Imperium base game has a standard set of board actions, and some of them actually become a little worthless as the game increases, as you get farther along in your session. I think Dune Imperium Uprising wins this conversation flat out. Correct me if I'm wrong, argue with me if you'd like, but the locations that have changed here, from recalling your spy and getting bonuses to making the High Council seat, which is a location that gives you extra spending resource for buying new cards to add into your deck, actually having a secondary ability after you've utilized it once. Whereas in base game Dune Imperium, those two locations are just all right. But once you've utilized them, once you've gone to them, there's not too much reason to continue going back. This provides those new opportunities, gives you a reason to utilize those locations. And not only that, but it also introduces a mini expansion called Contracts. Contracts replace a location in the base game that just gives you 2 coin. Here in Dune Imperium Uprising, you'll actually be able to get a little tile. This tile has an objective, a location to go to, or a thing to accomplish, or an immediate effect. And once you do that later on in the game, you will unlock whatever that reward or resource is. It's usually not too much more powerful than 2 coins or a couple spice or recall a player, but it allows you to time when you trigger that. And timing can be essential in this game. Giving you an extra card draw or a resource that you need to take that one additional action before another player is extremely important. I think the contracts alone, the contract space alone in Dune Imperium Uprising is such an improvement over the variability and the differentiation of the game experience that it is extremely compelling and very worthwhile. The other areas that they introduced have a few locations that are a little bit more limited based on your reputation or the influence that you have, meaning that strategy for mid and late game requires you to be having a bit more forethought in where you're placing your workers and where you're getting that reputation or that influence. If you're not up a track, there's going to be some locations that are closed off to you. And finally, the process of summoning a sandworm and breaking down the dome and being able to utilize them in battle is intriguing, but I don't see it come into play so often in the games that I have experienced. I've seen a lot of people on BGG that say that sandworms are end-all be-all, but I think they probably only come into action about half the time for me. We find that players get distracted by other mechanics or other strategies, and sandworms, while a fun, unique mechanic, require a focused, dedicated strategy to utilize, and they can be game-breaking. They can be your victory condition, but it's kind of nice when they're not. So, think about that. Do you want a game that has simpler locations, less complexity, which has really been the theme of a lot of these categories, Or do you want what I would argue is the best version of the board to date? All right, with the most available play space, the most available strategy. What does that mean in consequence? Well, if you're not adding any expansions to your game, you're buying this game and then you're making no more purchases for the next 6 months, and you're going to get these games to the table as many times as you're willing to within that time frame, then I think Dune Imperium Uprising has longer legs than Dune Imperium. I think base game Dune probably has 10 to 15 plays in it before you start getting a little tired and your strategies start getting a little bit similar. Whereas Uprising is probably more in the 20 to 30 play range. And even once you're there, I think it remains more diverse and more interesting than base game Dune. So, once we have that established, let's go into the final part of this review. Expansions and how they integrate into the Dune experience. I'm not going to talk about the mechanics of them. I'm going to have a dedicated review coming out covering all 3 expansions of this game. So hit the subscribe button down below, stay tuned, and be ready for that. It'll be out within the next week, is my intention. And I don't know that it matters so much when it comes to a conversation between the two, because the answer is very simple. The expansions make both games better, but the first 2 expansions that came out, Rise of Ix and blanking on the other one, someone leave it down below. My active working memory and my recall is not the strongest. I find that the first 2 expansions do match better with base game Dune, which makes sense. I mean, Uprising was created, it was probably in mind, but created to be a module or a hybrid or an available system post facto. Like it was made after those expansions had already came into existence, and those expansions really enhance and really balance out the game, with one of them focusing on combat and enhancing that experience by allowing you to recruit, these big destroyer ships or harvester ships or whatever they're called, and ballisting the entire desert and being able to conquer regions that give you bonuses when other players place their workers at them. It brings the combat into focus more, and I enjoyed that a lot, because it can be a little underplayed in the original game. And then the second expansion allows you to introduce more cards into your game experience. It allows you to have these custom cards with this custom resource, this gelatinous goo, and those cards can be really fun to play with. I like anything that enhances the deck building experience, and both provide more opportunities and a growing and deeper experience overall. Bloodlines is the hybrid, and I'm still not exactly sure how I feel on Bloodlines. It introduces a unique combat mechanic that requires money to hire and trigger your effects. Every combat that happens, you'll have bonuses that might be included. It takes a module, which are these technologies from another one of the expansions, the one that's combat focused from the beginning, and introduces it in a way that might fit better here with Uprising than it did in the original, whereas in the original, that sideboard was worthwhile to go to. Some of the locations here in Uprising just are better. You focus on them a little bit more. It heightened the experience. I mean, introducing those big destroyer ships and sandworms, if the conversation's between the 2 of those, the sandworms are just going to win. They're just better. And then finally, it did introduce some additional cards and some very, very satisfying leaders. I think Bloodlines matches very well with Dune Imperium Uprising and feels like it was designed with it in mind more. It encourages you to go across a wider array of the board, gives you more small modules to interact with, and provides you with a higher level of complexity when it comes to leaders than you'll find in any of the base game characters or factions. So, I think if you're going to do what I'm encouraging you to do, which is buy one of these 2 games and then expand it with expansions, if you get Uprising, then Bloodlines should be the first expansion you add to your game. Probably. If you get base game, then the 2 original expansions should be the first expansions you add to your game, depending on if you want to focus more on deck building or more on combat. All of them are great, and you'll likely end up owning them all, just slowly. You don't need to get it all in one fell swoop. I also have to note that I don't need the 2 original expansions to make Uprising playable. And sometimes when I do integrate them into the experience of play, I find that I end up missing or ignoring one big part of the game. The game state just gets a little bit too big and there's too many interesting things to do. That could be wonderful for some of you. I mean, I've played Everdell with every expansion included and had a blast, but it also isn't how the publisher intended or encouraged you to experience that game. I think the same thing holds true here. The expansions aren't meant to be mixed and matched, to be added together and create a big cacophony of chaos. While you can certainly do that, and I think it's fun, one expansion at a time, or both of the originals with the base game, is probably where I'd tell you to start. So, if you're looking to expand your game experience, then, I think at the moment, base game Dune Imperium would win. However, I think Uprising probably holds the candle when it comes to its ability to last on the table without needing corrections from extra published content. So there you have it. There's my breakdown. There's my analysis of these 2 games. Hopefully that helps you determine which one will fit you and your gaming group the best. And let me know if you're watching this because you're just a giant Dune Imperium fan. What did I miss? What did I get wrong? What have I overlooked? I'm neck deep into both of these systems, and I like them both a lot. If I had to start from zero, just get one of these game systems, for myself personally, I would get Uprising. I like a little bit of chaos. I like a little bit of swing, and I think it's still very strategic. However, if I was going to get this and teach it to a new group of gaming professionals or friends, I would probably get base game Dune. Not because I think it's the best or the strongest out of the 2, but because I can quickly add expansions to enhance that play after we've all learned how to play it. And I think Uprising is just a little bit more of a skill-needed type of system. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just how I approach games. So, for me, just talking myself personally, Uprising wins, even though I didn't like it that much the first time I played it because it was way too swingy and I needed a few plays to really get my feet under me. However, if we're talking about a brand new group, base game is going to take it, and then expansions are going to come pretty quickly after that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little bit of a hybrid, right for you, wrong for you. Let me know. Is this the type of content you're looking for? Is this review helpful and informative? Did I talk way too long? My throat is telling me that I did. Whatever the case, though, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing. Take a deep breath in, a deep breath out. Look around and be both curious and grateful. Life is good. And I'm so lucky and thankful that I'm here. I get to play games with my wife and my friends until 2 a.m. and then film a video and talk to thousands of you about why this is both worthwhile and cool. We'll see you next time. Bye.